Subra, welcome back to Kodaikanal, and it's a great time to be here,
My
an Independence
pleasure.
Day weekend.
My
And
pleasure.
today, let's start off with a very, very interesting topic. Who do you think is India's greatest wealth creator? It's a very open-ended question.
Undoubtedly, it has to be Mr. Deepak Parekh, in the sense that he's not the owner. Remember that unlike a Mukesh Ambani or a Uday Kotak, who are the owners of their company, Mr. Deepak Parekh is just a professional promoter, to say so. But the wealth that he has created over his tenure, let's say he started work at 23 and he is now 77, so over 50 plus years, he's created tremendous wealth for the economy, for the shareholders, for the people who are associated with the group. So let me tell you my interest in the group. I've done a lot of training. I'm a shareholder of HDFC Bank, mutual fund, insurance. So to that extent, I'm biased, but absolutely no doubt, whether you're an employee or a shareholder, he's definitely created wealth for everybody along the line.
Subra, there is one uniqueness about you in saying what you're saying just now. That is, you are an investor from the 80s. Most of us are investors from 1990. So we are literally those who came in at the cusp of liberalization. Coming from the 80s had different genres of wealth creation, and different kinds of people have come up from the 80s who have created wealth. But you are putting a professional above a business owner. What are these important factors which make you put a professional above a business owner in this ranking?
So the first thing I would start is the wealth Mr. Deepak Parekh has created for himself, and the wealth that he has created for the nearest person to him would be a very small gap. Maybe the gap is almost not there, right? Whereas when he's a owner, he would have created so much wealth for himself, and his employee would be here. You know, somebody would have created 1 lakh crores for himself, and his best employee would be at 500 crores.
Let me again ask this question so that we get more clarity. Let's say we compare two people in the financial world who built great businesses. You're saying that one was an employee who acted like an owner.
Correct.
And his wealth compared to his next senior most employee won't be drastically different.
Correct.
Whereas somebody else who built another great company is the owner, and his wealth is several times more than
Absolutely.
any employee. You say it's beyond comparison.
Absolutely.
So you're saying that that culture of shared wealth creation makes contribution all the more respectable and valuable. You're ranking it one notch or several notches higher.
Yes, because it's very inspiring for every employee of his, right from him right to the lowest end employee. He's given everybody equity shares, right? The lowest end employee of HDFC Limited also got ESOP shares. It may not now be happening in other companies like HDFC Bank, which has a slightly different culture, but that kind of wealth creation which he has done for every employee, I'm not even getting into whether it is good or bad, has been humongous, the kind of wealth that he has created for everybody. So many of my friends, clients, etc., who would come to me in the 80s or 90s and borrow, I would tell them buy 50 shares of HDFC Limited along with the borrowing that you're doing. That will also give you as much return as your other investments. And all of them have benefited. You know, he's created housing for the middle class, and that goodwill has spread to HDFC Mutual Fund, HDFC Insurance, and all of them also, because any person you go to who's born in the 60s, 70s, or even 80s will tell you, HDFC Limited, great company, they created my house. The kind of goodwill which Mr. Deepak Parekh created is perhaps a few times more than the shareholder wealth that he has created. So all this you take into account and say that is why he is a great wealth creator.
You actually brought up a very interesting aspect here, which is franchise building, because a franchise usually is extendable. It delivers extended value to the franchise creator. It also delivers extended value to those who place their trust and faith in the franchise. So there is a 360-degree possibility in a good franchise, and you're saying that that franchise effect is what is something that you really admire about. But in the 80s, when you invested in HDFC, most people would not have seen this capability or this potential itself. Even in the 90s, When I bought HDFC first as an investor, I was told buy it, they'll pay you good dividend.
Absolutely.
That was what was taught to me, and that was my safety kavacha. So, my protection. That, buy it, you'll get dividend. If not anything, you are safe, you'll get your dividend. And then out of the blue, they gave us shares in HDFC Bank at a very low valuation. Yet, even then I noticed that people who were very experienced at that moment in the market would still say the same thing, that this is a dividend story, it's a safe company to own. Why did people miss seeing this franchise effect for such a long time? I'm unable to see why we all missed it.
No, because see, I'll tell you, some companies are thought to be boring. You take Tata Power, for a very long time it was a dividend yield company. It used to sell at 100 rupees, on a face value 100 rupees, just because you were getting 7% dividend. That was the only attraction, because the price wouldn't change for a few decades. I remember buying HDFC Limited below par. The 100 rupees share was available at 97 rupees. You think about it today, you feel like, oh my God, what is happening to the world? But it was true, it was available. We didn't know how much to trust it, right? Because in 1980, Mr. Parekh was a new entrepreneur. How do you know how much to trust? 1979-80 is the time when I entered Dhirubhai Ambani's Reliance, or Kapil Mehra. All these companies were young and just starting out. That was the time when you were investing. How do you know who is going to come up like Mukesh Ambani or Dhirubhai Ambani or Deepak Parekh, or just fail like Kapil Mehra? So when you buy a share for 100 rupees and it becomes 200, you want to sell some and book your profits, saying at least let me take my capital out. That is what used to happen to us. How do you trust? It took me for 10, 12 years to realize, no, this company is different, it is worth staying. So in the bank, my strategy was different. I never sold. But in limited, we kept selling, saying it's gone up so much, it's ultimately a dividend share. Now there is no dividend yield because the price has appreciated. But the wealth that is created along the way, apart from dividends, if you take the dividend also as reinvested, I think it will be much more.
When did you start sensing that, oh, this is not such a boring company, this is a franchise? At what point you started seeing this transformation in your perception towards this whole company?
I think it must have been early 90s to mid 90s when he started HDFC Bank. Again, when HDFC Bank was formed, all of us would say, how can this company take on SBI and the PSUs? I mean, how would they? We never knew that there will be one magician called Aditya Puri who would create so much wealth in the bank. Another thing which in retrospect is, the HDFC group did not do any foolish diversifications. I mean, the company to compare in contrast is, say, Larsen and Toubro, which got into shipping, glass, shoes. You couldn't believe into all those diversifications happened, and cement, right? They just got into a lot of those things. Whereas HDFC Limited, having funded housing, could have easily said, oh, we will make cement and steel. Most obvious things to, he didn't do it. He built only in the financial service space, and anything that he touched, he made it number one, number two. Like HDFC Mutual Fund was number one for a long time. HDFC Bank is still, in terms of reputation, number one. Market cap can fluctuate up and down, but still is ahead. And HDFC Life Insurance was also in that range. Anybody you go to, nobody ever asked, should we trust them? Whether it was their debt fund, whether it was their fixed deposit or anything. So that is what is, I call, the greatest wealth creation. Of course, shareholders' wealth was created, but this is the greatest wealth creation in terms of reputation and ease with which that reputation was spread to the others. Because he made sure that the others lived up to what he had done. That complete trust, here things can't go wrong, really is useful in any business, and more so in the financial service business. If something goes wrong in HDFC group somewhere, they'll say, it must be some mistake. It is never thought that the promoter is doing something. So that is what he has built.
What really fascinated me about Deepak Parekh when I look at his journey is that he was a leader among great leaders. The kind of leaders that he created inside his company, in his subsidiaries, and those who went on to show that leadership outside his company. So there are three parts to this. So I wanted to talk a little bit about this with one example to start with.
See, first of all, the ability to attract people who are good or very good, but not very flashy. So if you take HDFC leadership, you would not find anybody very flashy and all that. Very rarely would you find anybody flashy. They have not been flashy. Whether you take Pradeep Shah, who quit and went on to CRISIL, or Mr. Deepak Satwalekar, who became the MD in HDFC Limited and then created HDFC Life Insurance, or any of them, they didn't. And when he brought somebody to run the banking, he brought somebody from Citibank, and very good culture, and that person also somehow molded into the HDFC culture, in the sense that, again, not too much of flash and things like that, worried about customer service and working on all that and building it. So largely the culture of saying, I will create extraordinary people out of good people. That, I think, seems to be some skill, some huge HR skill which he had, because of which he could do that. It's very difficult to quantify why Mr. Deepak Satwalekar should join and stay on, right? Because once when Mr. Narayan Murthy was asked, who do you think, do you know anybody who is smarter than you or better than you? And he's, without hesitating, he said, why? There is Deepak Satwalekar. So to get a person like Deepak Satwalekar and let him be there and let him grow and let him, I mean, today he's a chairman in two big companies. I think he's chairman in Wipro and Asian Paints. He's on the board. And that kind of, Mr. Deepak Satwalekar obviously created a team under him in HDFC Limited, and with Mr. Deepak Parekh, like the brand HDFC Limited once upon a time would mean Deepak, and people would wonder Deepak Parekh or Deepak Satwalekar. That much of leadership creation in Mr. Deepak Satwalekar, who again, like you said, went on to become a director in other companies, and that kind of a thing, and even after retirement is doing well. Then Aditya Puri, complete independence in how to run the bank. Look at Mr. Deepak Parekh, he didn't join the board. He could have joined. Now he is old, but at a younger age, he didn't try to become chairman, nothing. He is not even on the board. Only Mr. Deepak Satwalekar went there as vice chairman, and that also he quit when he became managing director at HDFC Life Insurance. So the kind of talent that is visible to the outside world, and the ones which are invisible, right? Those who are sitting behind and doing the work. Amazing how one man could think of all this. And I was told once that, Subra, there is nothing left in the mortgage business, so you should sell HDFC Limited. Completely missed the culture of the organization and the fact that it is the Berkshire Hathaway of India. Look at the companies that they have promoted. Each of the companies that they have promoted have created wealth, and look at their portfolio. So all those are indicators that somehow he got the whole equation right. Getting good people, maybe training them, maybe spending money on keeping them, or whatever he did, right? So it's very difficult for an outsider to know what were the ingredients behind this wealth creation masala. But he got all the ingredients in the right shape, right size, right quantity, and it's a big success.
This fascinating thing about the startup culture inside this company is something unspoken, right? You look at it and there are so many things they are doing. They have sustainable funds, they have created insurance companies in every vertical, you have an AMC, you have so many things. In all these things, they have a certain path where they partner, but outgrow the partner over a period of time. The partner probably has very little value to add after a point, because then the HDFC franchise becomes its own being, its own entity. Now, this is a very, very interesting model in India, which a lot of people have quietly emulated later, right? Many companies are partnered, learnt and evolved. But to do it in the early 90s, at a time when partnering was viewed with suspicion, and everybody was wondering whether the partner will gobble them up and leave them as a lesser partner. That is something which is absolutely fascinating. I wanted to talk about these partnerships, how leadership was assigned to these partnerships, and how that leadership, became the face of each company, and how that basically created this massive umbrella franchise.
Actually, this is very difficult because many consider him to be India's best banker, but he has never been a pure banker. Remember that he ran HDFC Limited, he didn't run HDFC Bank. So he did not actually ever run a commercial bank. But people close to him tell me that every industrialist or every banker, whether they needed guidance or help or whether they were in trouble, they would come and consult him. That was the kind of knowledge and image that he had across the bureaucracy, across investors, across everybody. And the fact that he could put entrepreneurial spirit into Mr. Deepak Satwalekar or a Milind Barve, who stayed on as CEO. I mean, Milind Barve got no promotion, right? He became managing director, retired as managing director. So I used to tell people that fund managers don't get promoted, they just get bigger size of funds. So a Prashant Jain, all of them had the luck of working with Mr. Deepak Parekh. Maybe they would have picked up the phone and asked about an industrialist or things like that. But to say he did something and created leaders out of them is very difficult, because these people have been good leaders. So they couldn't have gone every day to ask him what should I do, but they evolved as good leaders, and on their own they were all capable of I would whenever I've interacted with any of them, whether it is the Milind Barve, you realize the amount of depth they had in knowing the business. And he was Mr. Deepak Satwalekar was an employee, Milind Barve was an employee, but they could think like the owner, like Mr. Deepak Parekh thought. I mean, he's an employee, right? But he always had that owner attitude.
Now I'm going back to that phrase which you used, which you said is that HDFC is the Berkshire Hathaway of India. Now, Berkshire Hathaway bought businesses from owners and then made the owner run the business. Here you have a very interesting example of a conglomerate where the owner was an ordinary shareholder.
True.
Right? And leadership or the custodial fiduciary board simply created that ownership spirit in employees.
True.
Right? Which is something I would say a few notches higher than Berkshire as a challenge.
True.
This is not something that can be done so easily. Venture capitalists around the world have failed to do this in giving money. If you see the problems of SoftBank today, so many failures. Okay. Whereas if you look at HDFC as a parallel, the number of failures are much more limited.
Very small.
Very limited. While the successes are lasting, franchises which are going to outlive all of us, right? So in that sense, creating entrepreneurs in leaders, in business leaders who are professionals is something which for us is going to be a takeaway for a very long time in our country's evolution. It's not just today or the last 30 years of post-liberalization or the previous decade, which was the slow decade. Across timelines, I think that there is something here which is going to matter a lot. We need more people like this to spawn more entrepreneurs, because today India is in a very peculiar place where finding capital is not the primary issue. Getting people to build great enterprise is the issue, and most of the older groups are themselves struggling with this problem, getting that right guy. Whereas here we have had this happen. I wanted to talk about transition in this leadership, because you can create a business manager who thinks like an owner and one day he goes home. So you have to create the next guy to do the same thing. We are at the time in the HDFC as well as the Deepak Parekh life story where this is happening, where the people who first built this are now taking a break. They're going home after a great innings. It's like a swan song where they can all doff their bat and their hat.
End of an era.
Yeah, era. So, but then you're seeing this next set of people come in. I want you to share some observations on how this is happening and what you're seeing there.
See, this question that you asked about how this transition is going to happen, I think it's a little too early, because I think we are all going to grapple with in 2023, 24 and going forward, how are these people going to manage? Every company needs a Brahma, a Vishnu and then a Mahesh to destroy some of the old things so that new things can be created. So Aditya Puri and Deepak Parekh, let's call them Brahmas of HDFC Limited and HDFC Bank. Today you need somebody who will be like a Sashi Jagdishan, who is going to act like Vishnu. Lot of maintenance work has to be done in HDFC Bank, and lot of Shiva functions of destroying some of the old systems and building new systems. And I think Sashi Jagdishan is well trained in this, and he will be able to do it. It's got a clean balance sheet, there is no doubt about that. And again, talking of internal leaders, people like Parekh Suktankar handling risk, such an amazing strength to the bank, and it's a great credit to the bank that they are not missing him much. I'm sure they're missing him, right? India misses Sachin Tendulkar, there's no doubt about that, but they've been able to live without him. So similarly, we have to see how HDFC Bank lives without Mr. Aditya Puri, who's created all this, and we will have to see how Sashi is able to do the Vishnu work and the Shiva work, right? That we will have to still see, it's too early. I'm sure Roshi Jain and the other people who have been, Gopal Agarwal, are going to take over from Prashant Jain, and they're going to manage. Again, we are seeing the transition. It's too early to judge, but knowing them, I mean, I'm sure you will agree that it's a very honest effort at getting very good quality people, whether it is Navneet Munot or all those people, and they put together this team. I'm sure going forward they will do well, but you also have to understand that new people are going to now work without the, what I would call the Chatra Chaya of Mr. Deepak Parekh or Aditya Puri, all of them leaving. So we have to still see the transition, whether they are able to make, like Sashi Jagdishan now becomes the number one person. You know, earlier it was parallel, there was Deepak Parekh and Mr. Aditya Puri, one running the bank, one running the NBFC. Now can you imagine the size of HDFC Bank? The wealth, the treasury is going to be bigger than mutual funds. Then the company will have technology, which will be bigger than many technology companies, and a bank which is the biggest in the private sector, and in terms of market cap it's way above the others. I mean, imagine running HDFC Bank. If I were Mr. Sashi Jagdishan, I would require 3 junior managing directors to run each part and me to sit and coordinate. It's not going to be easy for them to be able to attract talent, to be able to retain talent, reward talent, and, you know, keeping them for a long time, which is the strength of HDFC Limited, keeping people for extremely long periods of time, rewarding them well, not maybe for their greed, but creating enough wealth for them, paying them a decent salary. They are not the highest paymasters in the country, but creating wealth in terms of shares and equity. That's what they have done. I think they've done the simple things very well. So it looks like what a genius, but then everybody doesn't do the simple things well.
Talking of doing these simple things well, would it be fair to say that a professional has a larger heart in giving shares to his fellow professionals, or somebody who comes from a professional background has a greater tendency to give than somebody who is a business owner? Because we have seen it happen in Infosys also, right? So you have seen so many tech companies, but the way Infosys gave right from day one is basically unparalleled. I mean, similarly, though we have not spoken that much about HDFC, if you actually go into these numbers can be very staggering. The fact is that they have nicely hidden it because they have not publicized it for obvious reasons, because they don't want distraction. But is there a professional, edge in this, that the professional actually could have done this better and has done it better than a business owner who thinks, I'll pay salary, why should I seed shares?
Yes, I think the business owner thinks by giving away, he's giving from his pocket. Whereas I think the professional thinks, oh, I'm creating a bigger pie. So when I have 1% of this company, if the pie gets bigger, my 1% will be valued more. Okay. So that thing. But the great credit has to be given to Mr. Deepak Parekh, who did not use some of the other dicey methods which other promoters have used, trying to take shares at a discount for himself and all that. None of that. See, there is a sense of fairness in valuation. So I remember you said he gave HDFC Bank at a low valuation. He gave it at par. Correct. Giving shares at par, that day maybe that was a norm. Because HDFC Insurance and HDFC Mutual Fund did not come at par, but HDFC Bank was given at par, and the wealth he created for everybody. Because you got 200 shares as a shareholder of HDFC Limited, you could have bought in the market at 40 rupees. Correct. Didn't matter whether you got it at 10 or 40, but the wealth that he created over a long period of time. Yes, I agree with you that he gave it to his employees. Maybe employees were therefore more committed to it, but he did not use any dicey thing like taking the shares himself at 10 rupees and giving it to the market at 2,850. The way how people are doing these things, those kind of subterfuge things didn't happen. He did not do any of those things. So it was fair. He was a good lender. I'm not saying he didn't have margins. Of course, he had margins with which he created wealth. But I think, I mean, it's very difficult to point out. Even when if you talk to him, he himself may not know what are those particular things which helped him create this fantastic masala. Right? But he has created wealth, and I'm talking of wealth without even talking of the dividend being reinvested. If you talk of dividend also reinvested, he's created fantastic wealth. So in a place where people say, oh, HDFC is very conservative, I say look at it as a shareholder. He's given very aggressive returns. So are you a shareholder or what are you worried about? Look at the fact that he has NPS very low. I'm sure he thought 100 times before lending money. He still had NPS, but I'm sure he met every promoter before he gave. He gave money to the builders, but he knew how to recover. All those skills, you know, from where it comes. All that when you put together, you get this magic called HDFC. Very difficult for an outsider, perhaps even for an insider, to point out exact stages because of all what happened, but to pick out a leader and give him leadership qualities and that person really evolving to be a leader. I mean, Mr. Deepak Satwalekar does not become chairman of Wipro or Asian Paints because he was MD at HDFC Limited. He is on his own so good. So be able to get the talent and retain the talent. Right? In that market, Mr. Deepak Satwalekar would have had so many other opportunities.
So the stories of what all they did inside in so many situations, because dealing with builders has been disaster for most others, including our public banks.
True.
And yet, risk taking was done. Recovery was done.
Correct.
They knew how to get out of a difficult fellow early, first, before others get stuck.
Correct.
So you didn't shun risk, but you didn't get stuck with risk beyond what you think is bearable, right? And this also applies to so many other businesses to which they lent money at different points in time.
Correct.
So it's not that they didn't play the game at all.
Correct.
They had to play the game because they are in the thick of the battle. And they still had to find their way out before, you know, it becomes ugly or it becomes worse. Essentially, it's a very sharp mind at risk.
Correct.
Whereas today you see the more respected bankers simply unwilling to lend, saying that no, I'm not going to lend for some time, you know. Whereas this firm has taken these risks, grown continuously, not been afraid to take these risks, even as professionals, and yet had that sense of ownership. You know, this is a very, very interesting mix of virtues or qualities which a lending business can have and still, you know, survive to, you know, grow and shine and thrive. So in that sense, this is something which I feel cannot be repeated so easily again, which is why today you are seeing a mortgage company and a bank coming together to create a much larger franchise, which will have much bigger growth challenges, but if it delivers on that growth the way it has done earlier, drawing on the strengths of both the organizations correctly, as you rightly said, you have to be a Mahesh in different parts, then you could create a franchise which this country will respect even more than it respected any other franchise. Now, he has actually left a bigger challenge, in my opinion,
Yes.
to a very small band of people,
Correct.
which I think you can see it both ways. You can see it as complete confidence, or you can say that it's a challenge that's being thrown at them. How do you see it?
Challenge for somebody like Sashi Jagdishan is to merge these two organizations, because people are going to turn to him as a leader. There is nothing called HDFC Limited available at the end of an era. It started in the 70s and they've closed it very nicely. Now to create a huge CASA, because all the money that you're getting from HDFC Limited, you're getting the investment book, you're getting the control over AMC, you're getting control over the life insurance company. So maybe you'll sell parts of it, that's a different thing. But to create that CASA, merge the technology, merge the HR, each of those things is going to be a huge challenge, right? Imagine the culture of HDFC Limited and culture of HDFC Bank was very different. To make HDFC Limited employees accept the culture of HDFC Bank, and the same bank now controlling the culture of HDFC mutual fund and HDFC life insurance. I mean, the challenges are huge. I think the opportunities are also huge for Sashi Jagdishan, because you get the whole shareholders, you get all the deposit holders, everything you get. I'm sure it's a great opportunity for HDFC Mutual Fund also to create products which are lookalikes of the HDFC Limited fixed deposit. obviously they can't duplicate it, but something which looks similar, because then that franchise is easier to shift. Or HDFC Bank creating products which the HDFC limited fixed deposit holders wanted, right, to create those products. And of course there will be some frictional loss, but if out of 100 rupees, if he can get 80, 90 rupees out of it, that itself will be a great thing. That will create CASA for him, that will improve his margins, and to make this behemoth organization grow at that 20-30% quarter on quarter, I mean, it's going to be a huge challenge. Do we expect such a big organization to grow at 20-30% quarter on quarter? It's very difficult, but Mr. Aditya Puri and Mr. Deepak Parekh have shown that they've done it in the past, and today you have companies like the size of Google growing at a fantastic pace. So once upon a time we thought this 34% growth and 40% growth, only smaller companies could do it, but today there are big companies being able to manage this. So to get a good person to head technology, to get a good person to head wealth and all that is not going to be very easy, but this brand attracts talent. Across the world it attracts talent. So maybe they have to look east for a technology person, maybe they have to look west for a marketing person, or they have to look for completely outside. Maybe they go to Hindustan Lever to get a guy to head the marketing and sales. I don't know what all things that they're going to do. It will be a big challenge, but he luckily is part of a brand which attracts good talent. So whether it is from the academic institutions like the IIMs or the IITs, or from the market, he is able to attract talent and keep them. He'll have to create wealth for them, he have to create wealth for the shareholders, and grow at 20%, 25%, whatever. I don't think that is going to be very easy, but I think he's got the franchise, he's got the customer base, he's got the money coming in from one side, which is HDFC Limited, fixed deposit holders, etc., and the customers of HDFC Bank being able to borrow that. He will be able to lend very well to the biggest, because the top 100 companies in the country deal with HDFC Bank. I mean, the Googles deal with HDFC Bank, right? So he knows where to lend, what banking to do, what technology to use. I don't envy his job. He's got to work 24/7, 365 days, but I think he's got a team which will be able to deliver. I think that's a challenge, and it's a great opportunity to be able to do that.
The markets, as I see it, the investors as a community have simply put together two big market caps and said that two big brands, add A plus B, you will get a C. The first initial reaction was that C will be bigger than A plus B, and the subsequent reaction was C will be less than A plus B. Both are emotional reactions in my opinion. The market is yet to understand the actual gestation which is going to be needed to turn this behemoth into a nimble moving entity. That's the basic thing. So what the market has to now probably give this behemoth is time. That's what I think is the essence. And while it gives time, it must be very closely watching the progress on multiple fronts, because there are many battlefronts which have to move in tandem. So it's like a big Mahabharata formation which moves forward. So it's not easy to judge the onward march of such a formation, which is what we call as a behemoth. So the market seemed to be thinking that maybe the good times or the best of times is over. Do you feel this is a bit of an oversimplification, or there is basis to this? Are investors overreacting, or are investors simply unsure of how to weigh this, how to evaluate?
No, I think there is no one animal called the investors, right? There are many investors. So initial reaction to losing Mr. Aditya Puri and Mr. Deepak Parekh will be, let us reduce the PE. We cannot give them the same PE. We cannot say that they won't be missed. So the price to book and the price earning ratio of HDFC Bank will both take some beating for some time, and then only it will develop. Then people will say, wow, it is growing, this is happening, and India is a great opportunity. Like all said and done, we are seeing a very good SIP figure, right? Month on month it's 12,000 crores, but given the size of our population, there is no reason why it can't go to 25,000 crores or 50,000 crores. So more and more that we financialize our assets, there is going to be a lot of scope for banking, because I'm sure every quarter meeting or every annual meeting when Mr. Puri said we will grow this much, his own staff would have said, oh, it can't happen. but every time they met targets and things have happened. And Mr. Jagdishan has been through for 20 years. He's seen what has happened. He knows what is expected. He knows his team is going to deliver. So I think they will deliver. Of course, there will be challenges, because what Mr. Puri didn't have to do was to see how the asset management company and the life insurance company and the general insurance companies are working. Look at Mr. Jagdishan's responsibility. I mean, of course, he's the boss man in the bank, but he's the treasury of the bank includes these giants. None of this is small, right? But having brought Mr. Navneet Munot to head HDFC AMC and to create a great team under him, I'm sure a lot of thought process has gone through by all these people to put together this team, and Vibha at HDFC Life Insurance, who will be able to do a lot of the Vishnu work, if not the Brahma work. So she has to do a lot of maintenance. Of course, she has to grow the franchisee, because HDFC Life Insurance is not as big. It's not number one, right? There is SBI Life, there is IPRU, with whom they have to compete. HDFC AMC also has to compete with IPRU and SBI. So it's not going to be very easy. But to make sure that these people are running parallelly and doing all those things, and this man sitting, you can't say at the top, but along with them, he has to make sure that all three are nimble-footed and running and creating CASA. But like I said, this franchise attracts good talent, so people would want to join. I mean, anybody who has left other mutual funds, they've also left good mutual funds to come here. Of course, these people will also lose people to other fund houses, but I hope they attract better talent and retain them than the kind of talent that they're losing. It's going to be a huge challenge. But one thing is very clear, in any portfolio, I mean in my portfolio, I don't see any reason to sell HDFC Limited or HDFC Bank. My HDFC Limited shares of course will go away, and I'll become a bigger shareholder of HDFC Bank. This is also disclosure of interest that I am a shareholder of all the entities. I am a unit holder, I am a policy holder, I am a bank account holder, so people should know that there is this fund, and I'm a trainer for some of their companies. So this is just disclosure of interest. So all this is coming out, and the relationship from 1980 till today has been good. Hopefully the future 40 years will be as good, if not better, than the previous 40 years. But there's no doubt that it's a huge challenge.
Subra, in this video, what I really liked was the way in which you brought out multiple facets and the Brahma, Vishnu, Mahesh analogy, because there's a lot of creative destruction, a lot of good Mahesh that has to be done, and that's going to be the key to creating a new HDFC like a Brahma, and then creating a new HDFC bank like a Vishnu. So it's going to be very, very exciting, and your analogy is perfect for the times. Let us hope that good things happen to a great company which you rightly called as spawned by India's greatest entrepreneur. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. It's a pleasure talking about Mr. Deepak Parekh and the HDFC brand. Thank you.